I call Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr Speaker, it's always a bit of interest when I get to follow Fletcher Tabuto. I got to do that yesterday in the House, actually. We like to call him the professor after his great revelation during the budget debate that he was an economics professor. But the problem is, Mr Speaker, that if he calls himself an economics professor, we on this side would like to think that he could actually support policies that would help to grow the economy or grow more jobs or be beneficial for New Zealand. Mr Speaker, last night they were the anti-job party along with the Greens when they were opposing greater growth and greater job creation through the Korean FTA. And today, Mr Speaker, we hear that they are opposed to much of what the government's doing in the finance situation as well. And unashamedly, I say to Mr Tabuto, we do say this is a plan that's working because it is seeing New Zealanders benefit from our plan. Mr Speaker, it's a plan that's working because 150,000 people are expected to get a job from the policy program that we're putting in place. We know the plan's working because in the last 4 years, 194,000 people gained a job under the economic settings that this government has put in place. Mr Speaker, for Mr Tabuto's benefit, I can say again the plan is working because we are one of the fastest growing economies in the OECD. Average growth is projected to go up to 2.8% over the period of the government's budget. And Mr Speaker, that is a growth rate that many countries around the world would be envious to have. And so I say to Fletcher Tabuto, it is working. I want to also respond to Grant Robertson. He was a bit unhappy that at FEC this morning he asked his questions and then he had to depart. And I asked the Minister of Finance, for the benefit of Mr Robertson, who did do a lot to try and talk down the New Zealand economy, how are we tracking compared to other countries in the OECD? Other countries that we compare ourselves with on a regular basis. For example, the UK, the Eurozone, the US, Australia, Japan. How are we tracking? Well, compared to every single country, we are doing better when it comes to debt. And Mr Speaker, our surplus target that we're aiming towards is better than those countries as well. We must remember that 4 years ago, the government had to post, because of the difficult economic circumstances, it posted an $18 billion deficit. That has been a huge change around that we've seen in the past 4 years. We're just about to reach a surplus. Now, I know the other guys on the other side, the guys and girls on the other side, like to complain about the government not being able to quite reach the surplus that we were projecting last year. Yes, it's their job to hold us to account. But just remember, 4 years ago, there was an $18 billion surplus. Now we're just about to hit it. And Mr Speaker, I think when New Zealanders wake up in the morning, they don't ask themselves, oh, is the government going to reach a surplus this year? They don't ask themselves whether the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement has progressed much further. They don't ask themselves, Mr Speaker, whether or not the GCSB is doing certain work. The Attorney-General made an interesting point when Fletcher Tabuto referred to the Counting Terrorism Crime Bill earlier in this Parliament, that New Zealand First and ISIS were probably the only parties around the world that did oppose that bill. Oh, the Greens as well? The Greens as well. But Mr Speaker, it is a plan that's working. It is a plan that is being implemented. Mr Speaker, when I was reading through the Appropriations Supplementary Estimates Bill, I found a few points that I'd just like to touch on. Mr Speaker, there is provision in the Supplementary Estimates Bill for work around the deposit subsidy scheme through the KiwiSaver Home Start scheme that this government is implementing. And I want to highlight this for the House because I think it is a fantastic scheme that is leading to more young New Zealanders, more first home buyers getting the opportunity to purchase their first home. Housing is an issue that many New Zealanders do care a lot about. And Mr Speaker, this government is putting in place plans. This government is taking steps to tackle housing affordability. We know that under Labor, house prices doubled when they were in office, so they can't get up on their hind legs in the House and claim to be holier than thou and that they did everything to solve housing, because they didn't. But Mr Speaker, this government is working hard to ensure that we build more houses for those particularly who need more houses. And Mr Speaker, we're assisting those with their first home through the KiwiSaver Home Start scheme. And Mr Speaker, I was quite pleased to see in this bill that there is additional funding for that scheme. 90,000 New Zealanders are expected over the next 5 years to benefit from that scheme, where we have doubled the amount of subsidy for those purchasing their first home and purchasing a brand new home. Mr. Speaker, for those who are interested in taking up the scheme, there is up to a $20,000 grant available. That is a huge amount for young New Zealanders. Couple that with their own KiwiSaver deposits that they have had in stock for some time. 5 years would enable them to maximise the deposit subsidy that they get from the government. That is a huge amount of support that we're putting in there. Put that alongside the extra homes that are being created through the special housing areas. Put that alongside the work that Dr. Nick Smith is doing to try and build housing on Crown land that is available to be built on. And I think this side is happy to stand up and be proud and support that policy. If the Labour Party actually were serious about their 100,000 homes that they wanted to build when they went to the election last year, they should actually be telling us where they were expecting to build those homes. They're quite quick to say, we would have built 100,000 homes, we had the solution for housing, we knew what we were going to do around housing, despite the fact that they doubled under their watch as well, Mr. Speaker. If they really felt they could build all those homes, where were they going to do it? Where were they going to do it? They would be going through exactly the same process that we're going through by identifying tracts of land that are available and tracts of land that New Zealanders can build on. So they shouldn't stand up in the House at question time. They shouldn't stand up in the House during these types of debates and give Nick Smith a difficult time as they have been, because he is actually fronting up with policy. He is actually fronting up to get more housing built in Auckland, and Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to support the work that he's doing in that area. Mr. Speaker, I also want to touch on the fact that the opposition parties are quick to try and criticise the government when it comes to children and when it comes to families. Mr. Speaker, if they were serious about trying to help families, then they should have come over to this side of the House and supported the budget and the plans we're putting in place around those who need assistance. The $790 million child hardship package, Mr. Speaker, is something that there are 160,000 families around the country who will benefit from that scheme and who saw that this government is willing to front up and support those families. $790 million, Mr. Speaker, that will be supporting those children living in hardship. It is something that this Parliament probably should have done a long time ago. The economic circumstances have now improved, so we can invest in that area now in a much greater way than we have been able to in the past. But Mr. Speaker, $25 a week in the pockets of those who are living in the most difficult circumstances will actually go a long way. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to those living in difficult housing situations, the answer to helping them to ensure they can heat their homes is one through the schemes we've got in place to insulate homes, but it's also about trying to get more money into their pockets so they can afford the heating. Let's not talk about schemes which would probably actually put people out on the street, because a warrant of fitness scheme that the Labour Party and the Green Party are proposing, which would see houses actually being taken off the market and seeing New Zealanders ending up on the street, that is not the way to help those who are wanting to have a warmer home. The way to help those people is to have an insulation scheme in place. It's also to have in place a scheme that sees those families able to afford the heating costs for those families. Afford the heating costs, afford the cost of putting food on the table, and the best way to do that is, one, through helping them through the benefit scheme, or more importantly, helping them get into a job. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a plan that's working. More people are getting jobs under this plan. Higher wages are seen under this plan. Less unemployment is seen under this plan. And, Mr. Speaker, we're proud of this plan and all that it's achieving for New Zealanders.
The next call was a split call. Gareth Hughes, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou, kia ora. Mr. Speaker, I heard a lot of housing from the member Jami-Lee Ross, but it's a